I would like to welcome everyone to the 34th Congress of on this Sunday morning. Today, we are joined by Maude Barlow, an inspiring woman for me and for so many water justice and water protector activists and campaigners all over the US, across the world, and also at the United Nations. Maude is a Canadian who over many decades has been a tireless advocate and campaigner for the human right to water, for water justice, for ensuring that water and sanitation services are protected as essential public services, a public trust and part of the global commons, and for challenging the bottled water industry that now, these days, we should call out for their huge and damaging carbon footprint. She is the recipient of many honorary degrees and awards. She chairs the board of Washington-based Food and Water Watch and Ottawa, Canada-based Blue Planet Project, a global initiative by the Council of Canadians. Excuse me for just a minute. Maude co-founded the Council of Canadians and chaired its board for over 3 decades. She's authored many books, and I'm sure many of you listening now are familiar with her 2005 Blue Gold, The Fight to Stop the Corporate Theft of the World's Water, that she co-wrote with Tony Clark. Also in 2005, she received the Right Livelihood Award, also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize, to recognize her work and commitment to human right to water, especially during her, and also to recognize her tenure as a special rapporteur at the United Nations at that time. I'm also pleased to have Mary Grant join us, who is the Public Water for All campaign director. Can you please, is it possible for you to spotlight Maude and Mary, or you just want to spotlight me? Oh, you've got Maude there, good, and there's Mary, thank you. I'm also pleased to have Mary Grant join us, who is the Public Water for All campaign director at Food and Water Watch in Washington, DC, where she oversees campaigns to support universal access to safe water in the United States by promoting responsible and affordable public provision of water and sewer service. The Blue Communities Project that they will introduce to you could come at no better time here in the US to organize around the human right to water and join in the worldwide movement where so many hundreds of millions of people and billions are threatened by the converging crises of food insecurity that Vandana Shiva spoke about so eloquent yesterday, coupled with the catastrophic events of climate chaos with droughts, extreme heat, torrential rains and floods, and also the pandemic. Every day we realize the essential truth that water is life, and also of the interconnectedness of issues that we cannot just work on in their different silos. WILF Women I Know have, beginning with the Save the Water campaign that started in 2002 and that expanded in Earth Democracy in 2011, have joined and advocated for and worked on local community and national water campaigns. This Blue Communities Project for Earth Democracy could be seen as maybe the 3rd stage of the Water of Life is Life campaign in the United States. The first decade of water privatization could be from the mid 1990s to the mid 2000s, or the mid 2000s, when the World Trade Organization was created and the first North American Free Trade Agreement was signed. And that was in the mid 1990s, and then followed in 1977 by the first World Water Council's meeting of the World Water Forum, held every 3 years. This is the corporate center of world policy, corporate and financial center of creating policies around water and the commercialization and privatization of water. Although they've managed now, after many years, with the 9th World Water Funding Forum coming up in 2022, to create better messaging. The theme of this conference next spring is water security for peace and development. And they call people attending that meeting stakeholders, a term now being used that helps corporations put themselves at the center of policymaking and claiming that they have a seat at all tables. Next period, I would say, beginning in the mid 2000s, sort of culminated in 2010, you could say, at the spring meeting in Bolivia around Earth Day, the World People's Summit on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth. Already at that time, Maude was sounding the alarm about melting glaciers, especially in the Andes, the threat of drought and dwindling water supplies. And people in that region were beginning to make the case for compensation from the international community for environmental damage. Finally, that organizing culminated in July of 2010 with the recognition through a resolution at the United Nations General Assembly that explicitly recognized the human right to water and sanitation and acknowledged that clean drinking water and sanitation were essential to the realization of all human rights. In 2012, after a 4-year campaign in California, in which Wolf was closely engaged, the governor signed legislation to amend the state water code to recognize the human right to safe, sufficient, and affordable water for personal and household use, the only such statement in any state in the country. Then in 2015, the sustainable goals were developed with number 6, clean water and sanitation to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. The targets were adopted to be realized by 2030. And so you can see that we are challenged with our Blue Communities project, that we must turn it into a national campaign as Food and Water Watch plans to do. So now we're ending perhaps the 3rd phase, where we know about the Flint water crisis, we know about water shutoffs, we know about so many aspects of water contamination that impact public health. And we know how crucial it is to challenge corporate power and assert community rights and people's rights on this issue. We must also keep in mind the American Recover Act monies that go to states, cities, and towns, and the infrastructure bill will provide some funding, but as I expect Maude and Mary Grant will speak to, not enough money sufficient to repair all the water infrastructure needed to deliver clean and affordable water. We need to keep our guard that the water privatizers, the big multinational corporations and even US water corporations, don't find that municipal governments are still strapped for funds and are easy prey to their claims that privatization is better. Thank you very much. This is why I've invited Maude and Mary to introduce you to the Blue Communities Project so that we can be part of turning this into a national campaign. Thank you very much. Please join me in welcoming them.
So thank you, Nancy. I think I'm to speak now.
Yes, please.
And then I'm going to speak for a little while, and then my good friend Mary is going to speak more about the situation in the United States. First of all, big shout out to you, Nancy, and all my friends at WILF. You do wonderful work. You have for years, and it's just delightful to reconnect with you. I'm just going to take 1 minute to remind us, maybe 2 minutes, to remind us about the fact that there is a global water crisis. I'm going to speak more internationally and how we launch Blue Communities. But it's really important, I think, to an extent, to disconnect it from climate change and the climate crisis. And we just had that horrific IPCC report a couple of days ago, and we all know that we are facing a climate crisis of very serious proportions. But I want us to think for a moment about how to separate water from greenhouse gas emission caused climate change, climate crisis, because sometimes in the climate movement, people tend to assume that all the water issues are a result of climate crisis. And in fact, what I would pose to you, and Mary's heard me say this many times, that the way we have abused water, taken it from where nature put it to where we want it, over extracting groundwater, damming rivers to death so that they don't reach the ocean anymore, et cetera, et cetera. We are actually, that the way we are treating water actually is one of the major causes of climate crisis. And the restoration and protection of watersheds is one of the most important solutions. So I just want us to think water a little bit separately, although of course they're connected. And to remind us that we have basically still a very large water crisis in the world, partially ecological. And that is that the planet is running out of clean, accessible water because of our abuse of it and our overuse of the existing supplies. But because of inequality, of course, we have situations where some have access to all that they want and many do not. We know that well over 2 billion people are forced to drink contaminated water every single day, and 2.5 billion people don't have basic sanitation. When we were all told a year ago when COVID first hit us, the most important thing to do is wash your hands with soap and warm water. Well, turns out that over half the population of the world doesn't have a place to wash their hands with soap and warm water. So it's an incredibly important issue for us to be thinking about when we think about not only climate, but the human right and the human right to water. So we started fighting, and Nancy, you talked about the large corporate presence, and it's no surprise that if water is needed for life and it's declining and the demand is going up, that there's going to be a rush on it. And there are those who would control water. It would make them more powerful and certainly more wealthy. So it's extraordinarily important that we keep water in the public, under public control. And this has been, basically the fight of my last 30-year life. I'm over 30, I mean, the last 30 years of my life. So it's really a very, I talk about it as a mighty contest between those who say water is basically a commodity like oil and gas and should be put on the open market for sale. And those of us who say, no, it's not only a human right, but it's a public trust and must be protected as such in law and forever. And so we have been fighting this battle. And I tell you, in many, many, many business schools around the world, it is taught that the best way to deal with the water crisis is to put it on the open market and let the market decide. So who's going to win this is still unclear, but we have been winning quite a bit. So this Blue community started in my country, Canada, in 2009. We had a right-wing government under Stephen Harper, was our prime minister. And he was saying basically what the World Bank said to poorer countries, and that is to municipalities in Canada, if you want funding for infrastructure upgrade for your water, you are going to have, and you need our money, our federal money, you're going to have to move to public-private partnerships. And this was a real alarm for us because we had managed to keep water in public hands almost entirely in our country. But we realized many cash-strapped municipalities desperately needing to upgrade their water, growing and needing new infrastructure would really be tempted by that money. So we had a big conference, Council of Canadians, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and we launched what we call the Blue Communities Project. And basically, we only saw it for Canada. Not that we didn't want the world to take it, but wasn't in our minds. It was for Canada and for Canadian municipalities. And we wanted to get to municipalities before the government did and say, do not allow privatization of water. You may get some money up front here, but you will pay for it for years and years and years in many, many ways. But rather than be against something, we decided to launch a positive vision, and we called it the Blue Communities Project. And to become a Blue community, a municipality has to agree to protect and promote water as a human right. And that will mean different things in different places. To protect and promote it as a public trust, so no privatization. And where there is clean, safe tap water, public water, to do away with, phase out bottled water on municipal premises and at municipal conferences and so on. And it just took off in Canada. It just took off. People loved the positive nature of the commitment, that this is something that they could be working towards as opposed to being opposed to something. And we now have 50 towns or cities in Canada that are blue communities, including most recently Vancouver and Montreal. So some of our big cities have become blue communities and taken the pledge. But it did start to spread. When I went to Bern, Switzerland, Nancy, you'd appreciate this, fighting Nestle, because that's where they have their headquarters.
Yes.
Yes, about 7 years ago, I guess 8 years maybe now, and met the then mayor of Bern, and wonderful man. And I told him about blue communities. He said, I love it. It's a way to get back at Nestle, right? So he said, come back next year and we will make Bern a blue community. So not only did Bern become the first city outside of Canada to become a blue community, but the university became a blue community, and the whole Reformed Church, which is the biggest church in Switzerland, became a blue community, much to the upset of Nestle, I can tell you, because what this meant to them, right? So then it spread, and we started finding that in Switzerland, there's an actual blue community organizer, coordinator, and they have dozens of blue communities, municipalities, universities, labor unions. Then it started to spread. Paris and all of the other cities in France had a private water system since forever, run by Veolia and Suez. They all started taking their water back into public hands, and Paris decided to make it permanent by becoming a blue community. Berlin had a huge battle that allowed the privatization of water, and they had to have a referendum to end it. It cost them a fortune. The taxpayers will be paying for years for the right to have their water brought back into public hands. But Berlin became a blue community. Munich became a blue community. Brussels has become a blue community. Thessaloniki in Greece has become a blue community. And then it started to really spread to other sectors. And I was very excited to go to Geneva to oversee the World Council of Churches when it became a blue community a few years ago. And that matters because they have close to 600 million members, Christians, who are in churches around the world. So they put out a beautiful, beautiful statement of ethics and principles about what they owe through their faith to the earth and to the Creator, and why protecting water and why protecting the human right to water matters so much. So it really has spread. And in Germany, they've started blue schools, and we're going to launch a blue schools project here in Canada. I'm working with a high school and an elementary school. We want to develop curriculum for young people to learn about not only the responsibility to care for water, but the human right to water. In our country, that's very much connected to the lack of water in Indigenous communities, but it will be different things in different parts of the world. Understanding that in many parts of the world, there is not clean, safe water coming out of taps. And so you cannot expect an end to bottled water, anytime soon. But the goal is safe, clean public access to safe, clean public water everywhere. And that has to be the goal. And, I look at some of the positive things that have happened. I mean, I love the Blue Communities Project because it's positive. But I mean, I was so taken by the way some of the municipalities decided to make this real. In Berlin, they said, okay, what does it mean that we've taken a commitment to the human right to water and sanitation? This is sanitation too, because all the water coming out of our taps is clean, it's safe, and it's very inexpensive. Well, they realized that they have a huge migrant issue. Migrants coming in, sleeping under overpasses in parks and so on. And so their commitment to the human right to sanitation was to take a contract with a group of young people who are building waterless toilets. They're in little huts, very, very clean. They use sawdust and wipes. So they're waterless, and they put them in places where people need them. So they put them in the red light districts, so sex workers have a place to have some privacy to go to the washroom. They put it in the parks where the homeless people are, under the overpasses where the migrants are. Certainly no answer to the homelessness issue, but it is a beginning of something very exciting. And so it can look different in different places. And I'm going to let Mary speak in a few minutes, but I guess I want to say and I wanted to say that there are now, it's being tracked by Transnational Institute, that there are, I think it's something like 334 municipalities around the world that have had attempted privatization and have moved back to bringing their municipal water services under public services. So it really, this movement can work. And I think it's important for us to stay hopeful. I just finished handing in my newest book that I wrote. It's called Still Hopeful, Lessons from a Lifetime of Activism. And I think it's really important for us to have a vision and a plan and to be promoting something positive that people can do, particularly young people, because in the face of people saying to them there may be only 10 years of a habitable planet left, we absolutely have to come back to hope, and not false hope, but a real sense of what can work. And I'll just leave you with a story. I was doing a literary event about a year just before COVID hit, so we were all able to walk out and amongst ourselves. And I was walking with a young woman who'd heard me speak the night before on Blue communities. And she said, I've become a Blue community. And I said, all by yourself? She said, why not? She said, I didn't know any of this stuff. She said, none of it. She said, now I have stopped drinking bottled water. I drink bottled water all the time, and I'm going to start telling my family and friends about it. I knew nothing about this privatization issue.
It looks like we've lost Maude for the moment. And
I think she was frozen there. No?
Right. I suspect that's an internet problem. So I think we should go on to the next speaker, and we'll come back to Maude when she regains her internet signal, because this can take a while.
There she is. No, there's Mary. Okay.
So go right ahead, Mary.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you to Nancy and to Maude. So Maude gave you a wonderful overview of why we should turn our towns and communities into Blue communities, and how this grows our global water justice movement. So I'm going to share my screen right now, because I'm going to walk you through sorry, 1 second. I'm going to share my screen right now, and I'm going to walk you through our new guide that shows you how to turn your town into a Blue community. So you should all see my screen right now. So this is for United States communities in particular. So we tried to make a plan and toolkits that can work in cities and towns across the country. So I'm Mary Grant, the Public Water for All campaign director at Food and Water Watch. I work with our organizers on campaigns to support safe, affordable, and publicly controlled water for all. We are very excited about the Blue Communities Project. As Maude described, almost 25 million people now live in official Blue communities, including Montreal, Vancouver, Paris, Berlin, and Brussels. In the United States, Northampton, Massachusetts, and Los Angeles, California have become Blue communities. So that's two. We know we have a lot more work to be done to turn every community in the US Blue. That's why we created this guide and these toolkits. The guide includes an overview of the principles and some background about why to turn your community into a Blue community, but it focuses on walking you through an organizing plan for passing a resolution to commit your town to become a Blue community. At the end, I'll share links where you can sign up and receive a bunch of toolkits and get started. So as Maude mentioned, the principles for becoming a Blue community include recognizing and affirming that water and sanitation are basic human rights, rejecting water privatization in all its forms. That includes all the different ways that corporations like Veolia, American Water, want to take control of water and sewer systems, from management schemes to outright acquisitions of public water, as well as Nestle or Blue Triton now wants to take ownership of water itself. To affirm that water is a public trust resource. A Blue community will also commit to ban or phase out bottled water in government buildings and at municipal events when there is safe water available. And that last part is really important because, as Maude said, we must acknowledge that many communities, particularly Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color in the US, have been historically disinvested in, exploited with resources taken out and not put in, and simultaneously bearing a disparate pollution burden from corporations, industry, and the military. That's why we added a new commitment for US communities in particular, supporting passage of the Water Act, to fully fund water and wastewater systems in the United States. The Water Act is the most comprehensive funding solution out there at the federal level. It would make corporations pay their fair share to fully fund our water infrastructure, providing $35 billion each and every year. That's what the EPA says we need to spend, and it will be prioritized as grants to disadvantaged communities. As Nancy mentioned, there is a current infrastructure package moving, but even if it passes, it'll only provide 1/3 of what is needed, and that's only over the next 5 years. So the Water Act is a permanent solution for funding our water infrastructure by making corporations pay their fair share. In the toolkit, we've broken down the organizing plan into 6 key steps toward becoming a blue community. I'm going to go over those right now. I know there's a lot of organizing expertise and experience in this room, so please bear with me. I'm going to go over these steps quickly just to highlight the tools that we have available. So step 1 is to launch the campaign. An initial planning meeting is a good way to bring folks together interested in becoming a core group that can work towards getting the Blue Communities resolution passed. You can recruit people to an initial planning meeting by talking with others who care about the human right to water and representatives of organizations who have an interest in working to pass a resolution. This is community-based environmental organizations, housing groups, labor unions, religious organization, and other folks in your community. You can do general outreach by inviting people on an email list, posting to social media, hanging up flyers in high traffic areas, and asking others to spread the word. So we have sample tweets, talking points, and scripts that you can use when doing this initial outreach, all available in our toolkit. Step 2 is to develop the strategy. So at that meeting, and after that meeting, you will want to do your homework, understand how your city council works, and map out a strategy for moving the resolution forward. You have to have a clear goal, passing the resolution, and then you will need to identify how many votes you need and who on the city council can you get to support it. So take a look at your council, do an initial analysis. Take stock of your resources. Who is in your core group and what resources do they bring? Who has relationships with members of the council? Identify your allies and your opponents. Is there a private water company seeking a contract who would fight this? And then map out your timeline and delegate tasks to folks within the campaign. Your campaign will evolve over time, but you need to have an initial timeline and assign tasks to people to hold folks accountable and make sure your plans are realistic and achievable. But remember, don't take it all on yourself. Delegation is so important within a campaign. In the toolkit, you'll receive a sample municipal resolution you can edit to fit the needs of your communities. Maude described earlier how different communities have taken this on and adapted the Blue Communities principles for their own town. We encourage you to do that as well. So this is a resolution that commits the municipality to those 4 key principles of becoming a blue community. Step 3 is engage people and grow support for the campaign through education and outreach. This can be done through organizational outreach or petitioning individual community members. We recommend doing both. Organizational outreach often means reaching out to local groups and asking them to endorse the resolution. We have a guide for this in the toolkit, including a sample organizational sign-on letter, sample emails for outreach to groups to make that ask, and tips with best practices and considerations for building a powerful organizational supporter list. We also have sample petitions, ones you can print and ones online that you can share that will help you grow your campaign. Don't forget that you can engage petition signers and invite them to your campaign meetings and follow up with them later on to ask them to make calls to their council member or even join a lobby meeting. Because of the pandemic, we do encourage digital outreach as much as possible through email and text. So we have a text opt-in number that you can put on flyers around town to help you collect petition signatures easily. You need to engage with the council members who can help pass the resolution after you've built support for it. So step 4 is meeting with the council, and that's after you build that public support. You need to identify a good council sponsor. Who do you know? Who is friendly? Who has in the past publicly supported water as a human right? And then request a meeting and make a strong ask. Once you have a sponsor, you'll want to set up meetings with the rest of the council members to educate them on the issue, gauge how they might vote, and inform your campaign. Always make a direct ask to each council member to support the resolution and get a clear answer. So are you worried about these meetings? That's okay. We have a guide for all of this. Our guide includes steps for preparing for a meeting with a decision maker, including roles to assign and how to make your big ask to support the resolution. We also have 12 easy tips for making sure your meeting is effective. Talking points, a sample script you can use in your meeting, and even a meeting report back form. So you can make sure you got what you wanted from the meeting and you know what the next steps should be. And the next step is kind of the fun part. It's about flexing those people muscles you've grown through petitioning and community outreach and education. If a council member is on the fence or refuses to give you that their support or tell you that they'll support the resolution, it's time to pressure them. An easy way is to have folks give public comments or testimony at a council meeting. Some cities have a portion of the meeting open to public comment, and others you might have to wait for a hearing to weigh in. Many towns allow public comment to digital platforms like Zoom or WebEx during the pandemic. Another good tactic is to leverage the media through press releases, letter to the editor, pitching reporters to do a story, or posting on social media. Don't worry, we also have guides and samples for all of these communication tactics. Our toolkit includes a template press advisory, press releases, guides and samples for op-eds, opinion pieces, and LTEs, those letters to the editor, and sample tweets and Facebook posts with social media images. Another good tactic is to reach back out to the folks who signed your petitions or who signed on to the organizational sign-on letter and ask them to call the council member. We have a sample call script too. Rallies and press conferences can also be leveraged, but it's good to build in an escalation plan so that you're building and growing. That's especially important if the resolution doesn't pass the first time, but don't give up. It just means you have to do more organizing and generate more public pressure on your council. Go back to step one and hold a meeting to consider your next steps. You can still build a larger and more powerful group to show that more people support the resolution. And then the last step, when the resolution passes, congratulations, you've done great work. Now celebrate that victory with all the supporters. This is something we don't do nearly enough. Celebrating victories is important because we deserve to feel great when we win. And it's important to build community and energize people for the next fight, because there will be a next fight. So now I'm going to share the link so you can check out these guides yourselves and get access to all our tools and toolkits. There's an organizing guide, and then I'm going to share the sample sign up form. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and put the links in the chat box for folks. So this one is our organizing guide, where you can walk through the whole organizing plan. And then this is the link to get the toolkit so you can start organizing in your own community. These tools are freely available, so please use them if you find it helpful. You can also reach out to us if you want support, or you can go it alone with your local communities. We welcome independent campaigns because this is a movement. If you tag Food and Water Watch in social media images, we will share it and help you boost your tweets and your Facebook posts. We also have volunteers in our network who are already working on this. So if you let us know you're launching a campaign, we can see if we can have volunteers in the area and try to find a time to talk about how we can work together. And if you send us your past resolutions, we will promote your victory on all of our channels and lists. We also want to make sure that it reaches the Blue Planet Project so that it can get added to the list of blue communities on their map and the website. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Nancy if Maude's not unfrozen yet.
Maude is here.
Yeah, that was terrific, Mary. I don't know what happened. I just disappeared, but I think you got most of my talk, right? I think I was just wrapping up when I went away. So anyway, I'm just delighted to be back. You're on mute, Nancy.
Maude, you ended kind of mid-sentence talking about walking with a young person who didn't know anything about water and Indigenous rights and so forth. Could you just kind of complete that sentence?
Well, it was just beautiful because she said, I want to be I'm just going to turn something off here. She said, I want to become I'm a blue community, she said. And I said, all by yourself? Because it was all, for me, it was like a big municipality or a university or whatever. And then she said, yes, why not? She said, why can't we take personal commitments? She said, I drink bottled water all the time. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk to my family. She said, I didn't know about the crisis in our own country and Indigenous communities. I didn't know anything about water privatization or its role in or the whole water issue in terms of the climate crisis. I'm going to teach myself. So it really struck me that I use the term that I want to turn the world blue one community at a time, but it might also be one person at a time. And I think if we can get to people, particularly young people, with a sense of why this matters, it can be very, very important. I was watching somebody outside my house the other day, a bunch of young people just standing around, and every single one of them had bottled water. And I thought, how come? Like, the water in our city is beautiful and clean and safe, and you're getting microplastics in that stuff. And like, what is this? Why haven't we gotten to you? Like, where, what's the missing piece here? And so what we're trying to build is this notion of blue schools, where we teach this concept. It's not just take care of water or turn off the tap when you're brushing your teeth. It's much deeper than that. It's that that water belongs to the earth and all species, that water is a fundamental human right and a sacred trust and a public trust. And that we won't, that we have a responsibility to care for it. And we are going to have climate refugees. And those of us who live in areas where there is water, I think you're going to see climate refugees in North America, like North America to other parts of North America. And we have a responsibility to take care of this gift that we've been given. So I just offer you, and Mary and I offer you, this concept of blue communities, because it's something positive people can do in their community, in their workplace. It could be a senior's residence. It could be a library. Why could you not be a blue community? If you're a store, I mean, why can you not just be a place that recognizes the values around inclusiveness and the protection of water?
So let me just ask, thank you, Maude. That was really wonderful to hear you again. I'm sure that so many on this watching today are inspired by you and the Blue Communities opportunity. We certainly at Earth Democracy, our issue committee in WILF, have a Human Right to Water campaign, and we'll certainly feature this and help promote and help organize among our members and branches. Our branches being, of course, in local communities, have the perfect opportunity to collaborative work on getting this passed at the City Council, working with other groups in their communities to mobilize. I would just like to, I'd like to ask, in terms of the bottled water campaign, which I've been involved with for many years, but not most recently, it seems to me we have an opportunity to really call out and focus on their carbon footprint as a contributor to climate, because of the long, transportation, distribution, supply chain routes that are carbon intensive, and also the manufacturing of the plastic bottles using, of course, oil. And then, of course, the discard problem. I think that would be very attractive to young people, and perhaps that's a way to, bring them into the campaign.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Mary speak to that in the US, because Food and Water Watch has done wonderful work on bottled water. And I'll have some thoughts too, but Mary, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I think so. And there's also a huge connection with fracking too, and plastics. So
yes,
I think we need to call out the bottled water industry. And I think we're in a real moment, particularly in the West, where their abuse and exploitation of water can be highlighted with the massive drought. There have been a key victory in San Bernardino, California. The National Forest, Nestle, just got their permit. They just got directed to stop stealing water from a national forest in the middle of a drought. And I think that now is it's a crucial moment and a pivotal moment. I know that the latest climate report really highlights the urgency. We have so little time, and bottled water is just an easy and understandable way that people can take action individually, but also within their community. And we do, of course, acknowledge that not everyone has safe water. So we need to build towards making sure that everyone has safe water and everyone can get off bottled water. We've spoken with folks in Flint who are just like, they just feel outraged that they have to rely on bottled water, just pure like the frustration. So we need to build toward a community where everyone has, access to that safe and affordable water. And I think it is a real moment for us to lift up the climate impacts of bottled water, how polluting and wasteful it is, the plastics involved. This is just a dumping ground for the oil and gas industry as gas prices are low, shifting it over to the plastics production, and how dangerous plastic production is and how huge of an environmental justice crisis it is around the factories, but just in a global sense too. So I'll turn it back over to Maude, if you want to add anything else.
Well, just very much agree with all of that, Mary. One unpleasant new development people on the call maybe know, and that is Nestle has sold its operations to two private equity companies. And they're bad players, these guys. They come in and they take over ailing companies and they just about run them into the ground and then sell them for whatever profit they can make. And it makes it harder to target. If I dislike Nestle, and I do, it's still a company that you can name, and there's headquarters are here and here are the people involved. But when you have thousands, maybe more than thousands of investors in these private equity companies, it takes it a further step into the financialization of water. And Mary and I have been putting together a network of organizations very concerned about this. And of course, the move with the Chicago enterprise,
Mercantile exchange.
Markets, yes, and to establish water futures market, which is basically betting on drought, which is basically saying I can see how bad it is and I think it's going to get worse, so I'll buy water futures at this price and hopefully make money, when it's not going to be small farmers, it's not going to be individuals, it's going to be the big banks, the big ag companies, it's going to be the big investors, and they know nothing about water and they care nothing about water. So we need to keep our eye on the ball, because frankly, we do some really good work here, but it kind of sneaks away over here, and we've got to think, when we think about bottled water, we've got to think about this financialization of water as well. It's the Chicago Mercantile Exchange is what I was trying to.
Yeah. So I'd just like to say, I know you were cautioning to not link water to climate, but I do think that there's another connection here to make with bottled water. One is, for example, Nestle is now in Sacramento, and they have lines to the municipal water, as well as lines to spring water, to produce spring water, bottled spring water. So I think in cases where they're using municipal water, that's another example of how they're taking water from people, and not just nature's spring water, but from people and from the local, residents. And the residents are paying, of course, then for the treatment. And in addition to which, I think in connecting it to climate, we need to be emphasizing how water contamination is going to be much increased with rising seas, storms, et cetera. And so the whole issue of safe and affordable drinking water, I think, is called into question, and we perhaps can link to climate impacts that way.
I just want to agree with absolutely everything you said. And I want to clarify, I wasn't saying separate them entirely. I was just, what I sometimes hear climate people doing is assuming that all troubles with water are created by greenhouse gas emission created climate change. Right. And if we take care of that, everything else will be fine. Well, we could end every greenhouse gas emission in the world tomorrow. We would have a water crisis. And similarly, is what you're stating, and you're right, is that what we do to water becomes part of the crisis. And I think that part of it doesn't get expressed. I mean, when you remove either vegetation or water from the local hydrologic cycle, you create more global warming. You create deserts. We create deserts. And so it's under like the Dust Bowl of the 30s in
Yeah.
devastated Western North America. People knew then and still know now that they took out the prairie grass way too fast. The topsoil dried up and blew away. What they assumed until fairly recently was that coincidentally there was a terrible drought. Well, it turns out it wasn't a coincidence at all. Doing that to the prairie grasses, creating that desert, created the drought.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to understand, is that our abuse of water is one of the major causes. So when I say that, then I don't mean they're not linked, but they're linked in
Right.
both ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I want us to think about what we're talking about, nature-based solutions and
Right.
protection of climate, the protection of soils and wetlands and watersheds and forests. I mean, we all know this, but we need to understand that is the part of the climate solution, not in a monetary way. In some ways that some people are using nature-based solutions, but really truly in a way that we all take very, very seriously with regulation.
Yeah. So I think it would be nice to open up in these last 10 minutes, I think we have, to questions from those listening and watching. If you would type your question in the chat in capitals with the first word question, I can watch these and then ask Mary or Maude for you, or you can direct your question to either one, please. I'll be looking for questions. Thank you. Don't see one at the moment.
Yes, Nancy, there's one from Barbara Nelson. It's in capitals.
It's not showing up here for me. Why don't you read it, Randy?
Okay. This is from Barbara Nilsson from San Francisco. Question to both Maude and Mary. Where can we turn to manufacturers to design safe bottles, metal ones maybe, for sale, maybe even by municipalities and organizations like Food and Water Watch or even schools, for people to own and fill and refill with safe community water? Don't we have manufacturers already who have such bottles for sale, whether they are metal, etc.?
I'm just going to jump
other
in.
one, Nancy. So let's
Now,
do
I'm
that one
not-
first. Go ahead.
I'm not
Thank you.
in the US, but I'm just going to point this lovely bottle right here. It's called Brescia. I happen to be chancellor of the last all women's university in Canada. I don't know why, in London, Ontario. And Brescia became a blue community last year, and they designed this bottle for Brescia, and it is brilliant because what it is glass in the inside. So you're not drinking from plastic, but it's plastic on the outside, so it's not going to break. And I just think it's absolutely brilliant, and it's got the little thing at the top. And my granddaughter, I had loved it, and she absconded with it because it's quite wonderful. I just wanted to put the little rah-rah from my university. Mary, my thoughts here.
Thank you.
There's definitely a lot of bottles out there. We have a guide for choosing a water filter too. So on our website, I can share in a second about a guide for reading your water quality report so you can check to make sure your tap water is safe, and a guide for picking a water filter if there are any contaminants, particularly if you live in an older building with lead pipes. We have a guide for choosing the right lead filter. So making sure you have the right filters on if you need them in your community. And then we also do, to our supporters, folks who sign up, sometimes we give out clean canteens, is the bottle we often share with folks, a metal one. But there's lots of bottles out there, and we're not going to endorse any specific brand. But I will put the guide right now for reading your tap water and finding the right filter in 1 second.
Nancy, while she does that, there's another one that Ellen Barfield asked earlier.
Yes, I
Shall
don't
I read
see
it to
that
you?
at the I don't see that at the top.
Okay,
Would
I'll
you-
read it. A fairly
Yeah.
well-accepted piece of the looming infrastructure and reconciliation bills in the US Congress is the dire need to replace poisonous lead water pipes. Yes, important, but very likely the lead pipes will be replaced by PVC pipes, also poisonous. I've asked Food and Water Watch and others, but haven't gotten any comment yet. What do you two think about that?
Thank you, Randy.
Well, I'll give background for folks who haven't been following infrastructure talks. Right now, so Biden's American Jobs Plan proposed $45 billion to remove all lead service lines in the US. Lead service lines are the primary source of lead contamination of drinking water in the US. They're not the only source. Some schools have lead plumbing and pipes, older housing has lead plumbing and pipes, but lead service lines are the primary source of high lead levels in water. There's thousands of them in thousands of communities, millions of them in thousands of communities across the US. So $45 billion was in the Biden Infrastructure American Jobs Plan, his vision. Now there's a bipartisan package that has passed the Senate, moving to the House, that provides a third of that, $15 billion. Just for reference, the American Water Works Association estimates that it will actually cost $60 billion to do it. So what they're proposing is a quarter solution. Unfortunately, it's even worse than that because 49% of that, $15 billion in the package will be in the form of low interest loans, not grants. So it's only half of a quarter solution is what we're saying for the lead service line problem. It's not sufficient. We need to really boost that amount. And so we're calling for the budget reconciliation package to include the full amount of money that we need for lead service line replacements, as well as for funding replacing filtering lead school water. Because right now there's no money in the package for schools at all for filtering lead for filtering their water. There is an authorization of funding, but no actual direct appropriation. So we're also calling for the budget resolution to address these shortfalls and fully fund lead service line removal, as well as updating and replacing and filtering water in schools so that we can make sure that everyone has safe lead-free water.
So
the question was, though, what do you replace it with instead of PVC? Her question was, what do you replace it with?
So they usually replace it with PVC or with copper. And unfortunately, we don't have a good solution for how you can, with copper too, there's issues too. So again, like we do have a filtration guide that I recommend folks checking out if you are concerned about plastics in your water. But it's a tough question. So I don't know if Maude, if you have anything else to add to that.
No, there are no easy answers to some of the issues that we're dealing with. Yeah. Just, I do want to say though, how lucky we are, you guys are in the US, I'm Canadian, but still feel it to have Food and Water Watch. The quality of work that Mary and the team at Food and Water Watch does on, well, not just water, obviously, on fracking. Well, fracking is a water issue, and on food is just incredible. As you can hear from Mary, it's just a tremendous resource.
So Mary, I wanted to ask, do you then have sign-on letter campaigns that I do know them, I see them, and I'm on your list, of course, but where we could really be notified in time so that I can process those with my my board and President Darian DeLue, so we get sign-ons to that quickly?
Yes, of course. I will share with you organizational sign-on letters. If you're on our Water Warriors list, you get our global updates. But if you're on our Water Allies list, you get our US specific updates. If you're not on that list and you want to be added, feel free to just chat me right now or shoot me an email. So I'll put my email in there so you can email me directly if you want to get added to our list and get updated about sign-on letters and just developments at the national level around the infrastructure package.
Good, thank you very much.
Nancy, can you see the other 3 questions that were just typed in there?
No, I can't. It's not showing up. I'm so sorry. If you would read them, Randy, that'd be great. My chat is sort of frozen.
Okay, Robin Lloyd asks, could you talk about the use of water in swimming pools in the Southwest, contrasted with the dire need for water in indigenous communities in the desert? And another question is that there's a third one that's longer, but here's another short one. Are there ways to encourage use of gray water on a large scale, like in industries? That's from Cynthia Roberts.
I'm happy to take the one about swimming pools. I think this.
You take the swimming pools and maybe Maude can take the gray water. Okay.
So I think this in particular, that they're still filling up swimming pools. They're still watering golf courses in the Southwest at the same time that wells are going dry for Indigenous communities, farm worker communities, highlights why we can't use markets to allocate water. It should not be determined by who can pay. It should be determined by what is necessary for life and public health and well-being. So I think this is a huge, I think it really emphasizes and highlights the contradictions and the need for better regulations for how we allocate our water, and that it can't be done by markets, it can't be done by financialization, it has to be done from a public trust doctrine, from a public interest framework. So that's all I wanted to say about that. I'll pass to Maude.
No, and gray water, look, if we were to set up the proper system for water and sewage, it would not be using treated, beautiful, clean, treated water for our toilets. I mean, let's face it, it's I've been to Southern Australia, and believe me, you cannot be watering your lawn at night with water, tap water. You cannot be, you have a sink, and when you brush your teeth or wash your face, you have to catch that water by law. I mean, it's going to come to this in many parts of the world, and we need to have. And again, I think of young people. If we can teach young people right from the beginning of how important it is for some of them to take this career path in helping us with urban water design, rural water design. Peter Glick and the Pacific Institute has a very specific program on how Californians can cut an enormous amount of water waste. But we're going to have to institutionalize this to some extent, and I know there's a lot of resistance to the law. Martin Luther King used to say that that legislation would not change the heart, but it could restrain the heartless, which I think is quite wonderful. We need the rule of law. We need good regulation, and we have the right to good government, and we need not to ever lose faith with the fact that we have that right, even though we may not have the governments we want or need. We have the right one day to have them, and those governments need to work with us to protect our water.
So there are two more. One is a long one, but the last one was Mary Hanson Harrison said, ask about CAFOs. That will be talked about in the next presentation at 10. So let me just read this third one. Do we have time, Nancy? Is it okay?
Darian, do we have time for two more questions?
I think at least one more question, maybe two.
Okay.
Okay.
In California's Central Valley, this is from Janet Slaughter. She lives in Fresno. California Central Valley water is virtually unavailable for many residents, particularly farm workers who live in small unincorporated communities. Water has been overdrawn. The water table continues to fall. Wells have run dry. Farm workers have no access except what they haul in large and small plastic bottles. The UN sent a special rapporteur for human rights on water who toured the area and found water access worse or as bad as they are in many overexploited countries. How should we organize to address water access in these communities?
Mary, go ahead. Tell them what you're doing. Food and Water Watch is doing great work.
Please make it compact because we do have to wrap up.
Sure. So we do have campaigns in California addressing the fossil fuel exploitation of water and big ag, and how big ag is abusing water in California. I think California is also moving to pass implementation of their human right to water resolution. Maude mentioned it earlier, Nancy mentioned it earlier. California does have a human right to water resolution, the first US state to pass one, and they're working to implement it right now. There's various pieces of legislation moving through the state legislature. One this year set up an affordability program. They're also looking at how they address these smaller communities, farm worker communities. But I think it can't just be done through, it has to be done through a holistic framework, promoting the public trust doctrine and making sure that we're prioritizing water for people over water for fracking, water for oil and gas, water for big ag and factory farms.
Absolutely. So Janet, there's a community water center in Visalia that you could look into. They're very involved in the Central Valley water management, water allocation, human right to water issues.
And with that, I think we have to thank our wonderful presenters. We appreciate so much this information on water, which I'm trying to put into my background there. And we'll have our next program within just a couple of minutes.